Hey Brian, hey listeners, welcome to the 45th episode of The Goods, a film podcast. How we doing, Brian?
Hey Dan, glad to be back with more Circus Month.
Yeah, it's Circus Month. It's been a fun theme month so far, and the movie that I picked is a movie that, the first one of the month that we have selected that did not get very good reviews. I guess Greatest Showman got mixed reviews, but leaning positive. But this is the 2009 teen supernatural drama adventure coming of age story called Cirque du Freak, The Vampire's Assistant.
And I guess we're not burying the lead here. This one's a little rough.
That was its reputation going in. I did have an open mind, and you will see where I landed as we talk through this on my overall opinion of the film. But, Brian, had you seen this one prior to this past week?
I had never seen this film. My knowledge of it comes from the fact that it was previously covered on Buzzed On Movies, the film podcast made by a friend of the pod, Teddy, and his co-host, Matt, who have guest appeared. We've done, what was the phrase you used, home and away, where we were on an episode on their show and they were on one of ours.
Yeah, it's a home and home. So it's like a home game at my stadium, a home game at your stadium.
All right. I think home and away is just as apt, depending on your context, your frame of reference.
Perhaps more so. Exactly. Before we dive into this movie and its many peculiarities and wrinkles and influences, it is, in fact, as mentioned, Circus Month. So we have a Circus Month question of the week, because in our theme months, we try to set aside a couple minutes to talk about some topic related to the month at hand. So here's my question for us, Brian. If we were employed by a circus, members of a circus, what roles would we have? What role would you want?
So I think the question of what role would we have and what role would we want might be a little bit different. I think if I had to get a job at a circus today, I might be able to get like an entry-level juggling job, if such a thing exists. I can juggle a little, but what I would want to be is the ringmaster. I think that's the cherry position. Something we haven't talked about yet is the value prospect of or what do they call it? The value proposition of a ringmaster. It's like, what good is a ringmaster? He kind of just stands there and points at things. He doesn't actually have a talent of his own, other than he wears a hat.
Yeah, we talked a little bit about it in the Elephant Man episode, when there's the one bit where, I forget his name, but the villain ringmaster guy talks up the Elephant Man at the beginning of the movie, and you get a sense, okay, yeah, this guy could actually be good at his job if he had his head on straight.
Right. And so the ringmaster is the host, the master of ceremonies, but he gets to stand center stage and be a big deal and a big wheel without having to swallow swords or anything.
In some ways, when you're the horror host of your TV show, Count Gauntlet's Horrors from the Public Domain, you're kind of a ringmaster for that show. Like, it has some similarities.
I'm glad you picked up on that, Dan, because in a way I try.
Yeah.
But what is your answer? What position would you want to hold?
So, I don't think I would qualify as a freak for anything. I like the idea of just sitting there and people being marveled by you, but I don't think I would like the fact that mostly it would be like not an admiration, but like a recoil of disgust if you were a freak. So I thought about that a little bit. I think being a trapeze artist would be really fun. Swinging around, or maybe tightrope too. Like, there's this really good children's book called Moret on the High Wire. Really amazing. One of the classics about this girl who works at a boarding house, and a tightrope walker comes there and basically starts mentoring her and becoming her own tightrope walker. And I thought that was really inspiring. It's like, I don't know, like they talk about how liberating it is to be up on the wire, how you're free from the world. So I think there would also be some of that with trapeze, but I'm going to go with the high wire walker. I think that would just be a really cool thing to be really good at.
Cool.
And I've never seen Man on Wire, the documentary, or the Zemeckis film it inspired. I have read a book about him, but I would love to see that documentary at some point.
Yeah, I definitely recommend that you check that out. We'll see if it's my end of the month pick when we arrive there this episode. I could also see you being a good human cannonball, Dan. Or a human Dannonball.
So am I the one shot out of the cannon, or is a cannonball shot at me?
I guess either would be entertaining, but I was thinking of you coming out of the cannon.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, that could be fun too. Cool. But I was going to suggest you for ringmaster. I think you could continue to hone your showmanship skills. You're already excellent at it, but I think you could be a legend if you got to do it day in, day out.
Thank you, Dan. That means a lot. And not to give too much away, but I do have a dramatic theatrical announcement to make when Circus Month finally reaches its zenith.
Oh boy. That's a very cryptic remark. I'm curious to hear what that means. So, all right. I suppose we should perhaps, against our better judgment, discuss Cirque du Freak, the vampire's assistant from 2009.
I think it's going to be fun.
No, I agree. So, this movie is, right off the bat, this is a Twilight knockoff for boys instead of girls. Like, that is clearly what this was pitched as. It's going to be a new franchise for teens. And suffice it to say, it was a box office flop and did not spawn a franchise. Did not leave a long-lasting legacy. It's one that always stuck in my head because I liked the circus wrinkle on it. I just thought that was kind of unique, and I don't know. Always intrigued me a little bit. This came out right around the peak of my paying attentions to movies. I was a junior or senior in college, so I definitely saw the ads for this one and remained intrigued. It made me think of the old Goosebumps books that I read. There was occasionally circus-themed ones in that series that I always thought that the horror and the circus blended pretty well. Because there's also some horror elements to this, even though it's more of like a teen adventure. I don't know.
Yeah, great points. So I mentioned that there's a Buzzed on Movies episode covering this. I'm going to approach their coverage in kind of the way that I did with Jenny Nicholson's review of Greatest Showman, where I'm going to acknowledge off the bat that some of my commentary is going to overlap just because their thoughts are already in my head. But I do hope to offer something distinct and unique here, and I think we can do that. I wanted to point out, well, first off, like you said, and like Teddy said in his episode, that I like the circus. I kind of like vampires too, so this seems like a natural appeal to my interests. In a way, I'm like surprised that this is a Dan pick and not a Brian pick.
So I think when I initially and mysteriously pitched this movie to you over chat, not on the pod, I said, I think I found a movie that has a great overlap between both of our interests, because it does co-star John C. Reilly, who you are on the record as being a big fan of. And
right.
It's also got like coming of age teen stuff, like a little bit of romance with the teens, and you know that's the type of stuff that I just really enjoy and watch a whole lot of, and have had a bunch of teen drama, comedy, romance picks on this pod. And it had kind of a Harry Potter element to it, which I think is, both of us like Harry Potter. So, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So it seems like this one is lined up to check a bunch of boxes for us, and that may have put additional pressure on it to perform.
Sure.
And we'll see if it actually delivers. A couple other things I wanted to point out about what you said. So I was surprised. I looked it up. Cirque du Freak is actually the beginning of a 12-book series. And this is a big reveal, maybe, but the main character of the books is named Darren Shan, and the books are written by Darren Shan.
So I listened to a little bit of the Buzzed On movies. I didn't listen to their whole coverage of it. They made a big deal of this, but I think they, and perhaps you, have not read as much young adult fiction as I have, because it's a fairly common trope to have the author narrator be like a pen name for an actual writer. So the idea is that like they're pretending even on the copy to be the character in the story. Like even Lemony Snicket in the series of Unfortunate Events is that. So I do not find that as astonishing as you do, although it is still amusing from the outside looking in.
All right. It still definitely seems like a self-insert character, because Darren Shan's role in the story is to have like Mary Sue level unquestioned greatness. Everybody just agrees that he's the best without ever showing us. We're just told.
Right, and I think that's common for these types of YA books. I mean, not necessarily the author's character name being that, but the heroes of the story have to simultaneously be a normal, relatable person, but also the protagonist of an epic saga that, you know, ends up being a hero and a winner and everything like that.
Okay.
The extent to which that is pulled off, I think you're right that here it comes off very forced when you compare it to Harry Potter, for example, which is kind of the gold standard in that regard. Pulls off the wish fulfillment, but also a normal kid element much better.
One more point I want to make right here is that, so these books, the Cirque du Freak series, the saga of Darren Shan by Darren Shan, they started in 2000 and all 12 books were cranked out by 2004.
Wait, really?
Yes.
3 books a year?
Apparently. I'll bet that he had them sitting in a briefcase or something and was able to, you know, he probably wrote them over a longer period of time than he published them.
That's pretty crazy.
But Twilight, the first book, appeared in 2005.
Gotcha.
However, I mean, you can definitely tell that this movie was greenlit to be a movie in the wake of Twilight. Like, I think the first Twilight movie was 2008, and then this one, like, immediately went to press, or whatever you call it when it's a movie, because it came out in 2009.
I wonder also if the books spiked in popularity when vampires became the hot thing du jour after Twilight.
I'm sure that they did. And you said Twilight for boys. This is like a vampire sausage fest. There's no girl vampires in this film that I saw.
No, there isn't. Yeah, I got some thoughts on that too. I do think like Twilight has female vampires, but I feel like that's not a traditional thing in stories. Like I feel, and I have some extended thoughts on this that I will get to later. But is that true?
Oh, I'm going to cut in because, well, in Dracula, 1897, seminal vampire text, he's got like multiple vampire brides who like corner Jonathan Harker at the start of the story. So they're present, if not the most prominent.
Oh, really? I didn't know that. I didn't know Dracula had female vampires.
Yes, and people who like study vampire literature like to talk about Carmilla, which was this vampire story that came out right before Dracula, and it stars a lesbian vampire.
Interesting.
So, I think as long as they're sexually predatory, they can be either gender. But I would say you're not wrong to remark that the quintessential image is the male vampire.
Right. Okay. So one of my favorite columns on the internet is on AV Club, written by Tom Brehan, who I may or may not have mentioned on this pod before, but he's one of my favorite pop culture writers right now. He has an amazing series on the website Stereo Gum, where 3 times a week he reviews a number 1 song, and he goes chronologically through the US Billboard history. So he's currently, I think, in the late 80s. And those columns are really good. And he ranks each song on a scale from 1 to 10. But another column he writes is on the AV Club called The Popcorn Champs. And he, every other week, writes a really thoughtful and long review and analysis of the highest grossing movie of the year. And he started, I think, in the 50s or 60s and has gone up. He's now, I think, like in 2018 or something. He just published the Rogue One from, so whenever Rogue One came out. But he talked about in one of the years that Harry Potter was the top grossing movie. The long tail of Harry Potter inspired knockoffs, which are basically like teen paranormal or children, young adult paranormal franchises, generally based off of young adult books, that the intent is to turn it into a multi-movie franchise that can come out every couple of years and each make 9 figures at the box office. And there have been many, many attempts to make this happen. Here are some of the ones that have failed. So, of course, Twilight succeeded. And if you wanted to lump Hunger Games in there, that one definitely succeeded as well. Those would be the 2 biggest successes. But here are some of the failures. The Narnia series, the first one was a pretty big hit, but the rest of them were not. The Percy Jackson movies were flopped. The City of Bones movie flopped. The Golden Compass movie flopped, although it got rebooted as an HBO show recently. The Beautiful Creatures movie flopped. Aragon, Spiderwick Chronicles, The Dark is Rising, The Series of Unfortunate Events, also later rebooted as a TV show. Inkheart, City of Ember, I Am Number 4, Beastly, Miss Peregrine's Home for Peculiar Children, and Alex Rider were all ones that I could find with even the tiniest bit of research, and there are probably a couple missing from that list. So there was definitely a time period where that's what every studio was trying to do, was get their own Harry Potter or their own Twilight.
So just like those, this is a case where it's obviously set up with the expectation that there are going to be sequels. You've got a lot of big name actors in the mix, and many of their characters are only just introduced, and you really feel like something is going to happen with them later that we then never get to see because those movies didn't happen.
For sure, and we can talk more about it. It kind of feels like a weakness of this movie is that it was almost assuming that it was the first in a series, and it kind of pulled its punches and didn't give us the best it had to offer in terms of story material. And I think that's a big mistake. I feel like if you're making your movie, shoot your shot. Don't take anything for granted. Apparently at one point there was a negotiation for 4 sequels, or maybe it was 3 sequels to bring it to a series of 4. I can't remember which.
Yeah, I think that's what I read, that it was going to be 4 off the bat. And that's what they were in talks with the author about.
I guess which would have made sense because there were 4 trilogies in the Darren Shan series starring Darren Shan.
Yeah, so the first 2 books of the series, this is something else that Buzzed on Movies commented on, are called Cirque du Freak and the Vampire's Assistant. So the name of the film is Cirque du Freak, the Vampire's Assistant. It's similar to if Harry Potter's first film was called The Sorcerer's Stone, The Chamber of Secrets.
So I heard that one too, and that's another one I'm going to push back on a little bit. It's kind of a Star Wars situation where I don't know exactly what the name was first, but the first book actually has a subtitle of A Living Nightmare when it's published these days, and the series is just called Cirque du Freak. Maybe at the time, though, that is how it was published.
Okay, that's interesting. I would have called the sequel The Vampire Strikes Back. One last thought on the laundry list of books you mentioned, attempts at franchises which were ultimately aborted. Series of Unfortunate Events. There was a point when we were discussing what birthday episodes of our podcast were going to be, and what do we talk about when it's a birthday episode? And Dan, who has a June birthday, said, "Oh, we'll talk about movies that came out around our birthdays." And I have a January birthday. Good movies do not come out in January. It is the boneyard, just the absolute garbage heap of studio films. And one of them I mentioned because I've gone to the movie theater for my birthday a couple years. And one is the rather forgettable Series of Unfortunate Events film starring Jim Carrey.
That's a good point. I'm glad we didn't choose that theme for your behalf, because I'm in like the middle of the summer blockbusters, and you would have had the movies that were bad enough that they dumped them to the winter well after Oscar consideration.
Yeah, it's not even Christmas. It's post Oscars wasteland.
Before we dive into the movie itself, something you've mentioned in the podcast in the past that I'd like to hear a little bit more about is you and your brother's relationship with Twilight.
I'm glad you brought that up. I did want to talk about this. So, when I was in high school, like I said, the first Twilight book came out in 2005. The first movie, I guess, came out in 2008. For reasons I still don't really understand, my brother got really into Twilight. I think he and his friend rented the first movie as like a joke, but then for whatever reason, he actually liked it. I think he read the books. Definitely he read the movies. Or,
yeah,
watched them because they're films. I get those two mixed up sometimes. But in discussions with my mom around this time, we learned that one of her friends works in Forks, Washington, which is the setting of the Twilight series. I think the reason for that was Stephenie Meyer literally Googled what is the rainiest town in the United States, and the result was Forks, Washington. And so she used that because in the stories in Twilight, the vampires can go out in the day, but if the sun shines on them, they sparkle, giving away the fact that they're not human. And so they gravitate towards places that are really rainy and there's not a lot of sunlight. So now we knew a contact in Forks, Washington. And more than that, she actually worked on the Indian reservation, because there's a Native American tribe there who live in a neighboring community called La Push. This is the Quileute tribe. And Stephenie Meyer worked this group into the novels. If you know anything about the series, Jacob Black, the other competitor for the heart of protagonist Bella Swan, is a member of the Quileute tribe, who in the novel can shapeshift into werewolves.
Right. So the Native American tribe, they're all werewolves, and they're kind of rivals with the vampire tribe.
That's exactly right. And so we were in the thick of it. We went and we experienced the Quileute Days Tribe Festival, and the actor Gil Birmingham, who plays Jacob's dad, was there visiting.
Oh, man.
And we went around and saw the sights. It was a case where, after the fact, the town kind of created attractions. Oh, this is the Forks police station, so this is where Bella's dad works. It's like post-facto tourist attractions.
Yeah, I call this type of trip a pilgrimage. You guys did your Twilight pilgrimage. I did one for the musician Billy Joel. I went to his childhood home and took a picture recreating a shot of when he was a child. I used to be, and still sort of am, really into Billy Joel's music. And so one time I was up in New Jersey and New York, and I just decided to go for it, and my wife obliged me. So I know the approximate experience, although the fact that you got to meet an actor from the movie is pretty cool.
That's awesome. He's in Unbreakable Kimmy Schmidt, too.
Oh, yeah. I have one other semi-related anecdote, especially with regards to, what's the name of the town? Is it Forks, Washington?
Yeah, Forks, Washington.
So an old coworker of mine in my last job, her brother had made a decent amount of money making quickly produced apps for the iPhone store. And his biggest seller that I think made him in the six figures was a Twilight tour guide to Forks, Washington. So you would download the app and it would be like basically just a map with different places that you could go that were featured in the books or the movies. And he either sold it for a couple bucks or you could buy something in it. And it just got a massive amount of downloads. I think there was like a contingent of people who just searched Twilight and downloaded whatever they found. But I always thought that was a pretty fascinating business venture by this guy and savvy. And it made me curious, like, what other places people want to go to pilgrimages for.
That is pretty cool. It's like whatever book you read, you got to make up one of those apps just in case that takes off and you can be the first.
Right.
But when we call Cirque du Freak, the movie at least, a knockoff of Twilight, I just want you to remember that Twilight itself started as 50 Shades of Grey fan fiction. So
I think you have that reversed. 50 Shades of Grey started as Twilight fan fiction.
Oh, I apologize.
But
well, then I guess my point is that Twilight knockoffs can be very lucrative and popular.
Twilight has its own history. I think it started as maybe an online novel or something like that.
Okay. That could be right. I apologize. I'm glad you're here to keep me in check.
Have you read the Twilight books?
I've not read the Twilight books.
So I read the first one. Back before we had kids, Katie and I would occasionally read aloud novels to each other. And one time we thought it would be hilarious to read Twilight to each other. So I did most of the reading on that one. And man, is it not a very good book. It is, no offense to your brother and his enthusiasm, but Twilight's not for me.
Wow. Okay, now going forward, the podcast is just going to be Dan reading chapters of Twilight. Very last thing before I'm ready to dive into the movie we're actually talking about here tonight is I took a little bit of a dive preparing for this episode into other mid-2000s vampire media to get pumped up, by which I mostly mean I cranked the 2007 Swiss Eurovision entry Vampires Are Alive by the group DJ Bobo, which is a track that my brother clued me into. He found it for his radio show by looking up Halloween Eurodance. And it put me in the mood. It's got some of the same, like, emo haircut vampire kid vibes.
Sounds like a jam. Very relevant to today, and a jam that I could be down with. All right. Let's talk about Cirque du Freak, the Vampire's Assistant from 2009. So this movie was directed by Paul, I think it's pronounced Weitz, Paul Weitz, Weitz. And I know Paul Weitz because he was the director of the first American Pie movie and then some other comedies and dramas. He did the Hugh Grant movie About a Boy. Notably, Cirque du Freak is the only action-oriented movie, to my knowledge, that has been in his filmography. And I would say his lack of experience directing adventure and action was evident here.
So it's kind of a reverse of Kate and Leopold, where we could tell that that director had action in his DNA and was going to go on to make... Did he make Logan or something? Or what else did he do?
Yeah, he made Logan. He made a Western also. He's basically only done action and Western movies except Kate and Leopold. I forget that guy's name. I'm going to look that up.
Was it somebody Mangold?
James Mangold. Yeah. James Mangold. And I'm going to get a little nerdy here for a second. Talk about the cinematographer, the director of photography, who for this movie was J. Michael Muro. And he does not have many notable credits, but they include Rush Hour 3 and the racism drama Crash that won Best Picture. Where I'm going with this is that this guy is not a very good cinematographer, and I have some strong feelings about the look of this movie that I will share for our not so good things section here in just a little bit.
Yeah, you were talking about that earlier, and as you say, we'll dive into it again, but there's so much going on here, for better or worse. I didn't even pay attention at all to how it was shot, so I'm interested to hear your thoughts because it didn't even register for me.
Why don't we dive into the story here of Cirque du Freak? I'm just going to call it Cirque du Freak. The vampire's assistant is a little bit of a mouthful, so.
We've been saying CDF in all our discussion.
Yeah.
Sometimes I mistakenly typed CDB.
What's CDB?
Isn't it that stuff that comes...
Oh.
Or no, CBD, sorry.
Right, that's the supplement, yeah.
Weed oil or whatever. It's the stuff that's not THC.
Right.
So this is not CDB or CBD, it is CDF, Cirque du Freak.
This movie opens with a sort of in medias res teaser scene at the funeral of Darren Shan, the main character. He's revealed to be actually in the coffin, chilling, playing a game on his phone, apparently perfectly alive. It immediately jumps to a flashback, but I want to talk about the guy who plays Darren Shan. This is our first glimpse of him. His name is Chris Massoglia, I think. And I did not know him from anything else. And I looked it up and I found multiple references to his performance in this film being regarded as bad enough to significantly impact his future employability prospects.
It put his career in a coffin.
I actually don't hate him for the first half of this movie. I feel like when he is being more of a normal teenage kid, he's got some easygoing charm about him that I can see why he might get cast, but he doesn't have any range, and so when he's asked to do more, it definitely falls flat.
Yeah, I can't say I ever really liked him. My opinions, again, be forewarned, were colored by the review I had already consumed. But I think his main positive attribute is he's tall. He's very tall. There are some people for whom that's enough.
So after we get this little teaser scene, we cut to the opening credits, which, like, unironically might be the peak of this movie. Those opening credits were so cool. They're like cut out freaky silhouettes in a sort of like macabre shadow play style. It made me think of the computer game Limbo from 10 years ago or so, where you played like a shadow boy in a shadow world. Just a very distinct and kind of creepy look.
I'm a shadow boy in a shadow world. Yes, I love this bit as well. I'm a sucker for good opening credits, especially when they pull in things that give you a little taste of what the film's going to be. And so here we had these like old school shadow puppets of circus stuff and vampire stuff. There's tombstones and bats and tents. And these two guys on the little like shadow sticks are wandering through the different settings. Very cool.
So then the movie proper starts and it cuts back sometime in the past where we see Darren is a regular, popular, successful high school student. He gets straight A's. He's well liked. But his best friend is this guy named Steve. I don't think he ever gets a last name. I think he's just Steve, which is just the most generic of names. He's played by Josh Hutcherson, who would go on to popularity as one of the points in the love triangle central to Hunger Games. I think he's got it. It's like PETA or something like that.
Yeah, I think he was PETA. We could be wrong. He could be the other one, but I'm pretty sure he was PETA.
So I've seen those, and there he kind of plays the more boy next door type, as opposed to the more dangerous other guy in the love triangle. And then I've also seen him in the later remake of Bridge to Terabithia, which came out probably early 2000s. And so I always just see him as like an aw shucks guy, like nothing bad about him. So to me, he was very cast against type here, playing the bad boy, the troublesome guy who's the best friend of the good guy. I do think he's pretty excellent in this, though. I think he pulled off all the beats he needed to, and he showed me that he's actually a legit actor coming out with swinging with some phenomenal just presence and hitting different places that is missing in other parts of the acting.
Yeah, he's got way more chops than other dude Darren.
Mm-hmm.
He is acting circles around him.
Indeed. So Steve talks Darren into skipping class and committing some vandalism, and they get busted doing that. And then we see Darren interact with his parents. And these parents, I think the film wanted to go kind of halfway towards a Dursleys type parents. They're kind of overbearing. There's a couple of interesting shots with the parents where it kind of reminded me of Garden State. If you've ever seen Garden State, it does some interesting things with like having the characters and their clothes kind of blend in with this just super tacky suburban look of a house. But in general, these parents' characters did not do too much for me.
Yeah, so they're super bland, and that could be a creative choice. But also, we don't get to know them at all. We don't get any reason to care about them. And so much in the first, hour of the film is just told to us in a bullet point sentence, and then we're on to the next thing that you need to know. It's, I guess, exposition. I mean, it's happening in front of our eyes, so it's not like we're being told about something that's not being shown happening. But it's just happened so abruptly and with so little emotion that we might as well just be told it. When we're introduced to Darren, he's narrating, and he says, "So I'm really popular," and we see all the kids being like, "Hey, Darren." And then he says, "And my parents love me, and I do really well at school." And we get a quick shot of the parents saying, "Straight A's again, Darren. Congratulations." And then it's just bullet, 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 bullet. One thing after another, and I just found myself not caring.
I know, yeah. I can see that for sure. Especially the relationship with the parents. The one thing it does kind of emphasize is the relationship with Steve here, and that being kind of a crucial point in the film, because the parents basically ban Darren from being friends with Steve. So Darren tells Steve that they can't publicly be best friends anymore. And Steve says, "What, so we'll be secret best friends?" Very resentful of this idea, which I do not blame him for. I wouldn't want to be the unsavory guy who you don't want to be seen with either. It's very dehumanizing. I thought that was an interesting... I don't know. I think something I liked in general about this movie is I like the dynamic of best friends becoming rivals. I've written some fiction in the past that had that as like a plot thread, and I just think that's compelling from a guy's perspective. When you're like a young adult or a teen and you're like imagining yourselves in these scenarios, the prospect of clashing with one of your peers who you might be friends with, it's just like some intrinsically interesting drama.
Yeah, I can see that doing well. I mean, it's a Hamilton and Burr thing.
Sure, yeah. So in rapid succession, like as soon as this conversation is wrapping up, something totally different happens in this scene, where all of a sudden we see this purple car. It's just this amazing vehicle, just a triumph of design, one of a handful of triumphs of design of this film. This car rolls up, and it's this purple Rolls-Royce looking limo, and it's got these amazing headlight design on the front of the car, and it tosses a flyer out the window, and we get, I think, a glimpse of a rotund bald man inside, just a glimpse of him before this car pulls off. What did you think of this car, Brian?
This car easily is in the top 3 favorite things about this movie to me. You've described it well so far. Some things to add. It has the license plate Destiny. It has bright blue LEDs shining from the underside, and it's often emitting this lilac smoke. So you definitely know this is being driven around by like some metrosexual vampire guy.
Totally.
Like before we even see who's in the car, you know that this is, yeah, like a kooky spooky. There's moments in this movie that I was like, okay, this is a Gauntlet vibe. And this car is definitely something Gauntlet would aspire to.
Okay, yeah. And the flyer that comes out is for something called Cirque du Freak. Hey, that's the thing. They said the thing. Well, I guess they wrote the thing, but it was there. And we see that this is an illicit late night freak show. And the guys decide to attend this freak show. So we cut to that night. And Darren sneaks out of his house and meets up with Steve. And they decide to again attend this place. It's at a theater. And they have to do this kind of weird thing to get inside. Something comes out that says money ? And they have to slip in some cash. And Steve puts his hand in and gets bit. But eventually they get these 2 tickets. And they go inside to this show. And one important bit of exposition gets tossed out here. Just kind of out of the blue without really much context. But apparently important character traits for these 2 guys. Darren, the main character, is really into spiders, and Steve is really into vampires. Which, I know this is aimed at teens, but that feels like a very 4th grade type set of interests for friends, not a 16 and 17-year-old set of interests.
Yeah, it's bizarre, and we literally get that information as quickly as Dan said it. In fact, it's probably quicker. Because Darren, the narrator, says, "Oh, by the way, I'm obsessed with spiders, but Steve is obsessed with vampires." And that's how we get this important information.
So they get inside, and it's a very spooky circus vibe. They sit down, and the show starts, and it's a freak show. And I gotta say what the bad things you want to say about this movie. The freaks here are legitimately freaky and astonishing and striking and well designed and varied. I loved the freaks in this movie. The host is a tall man with this huge forehead, although not the character with the biggest head in this movie. There's a freak who's not in the show, who we see later, whose design is that his body is like 75% forehead. But anyways, the tall man also has a forehead, and he's played by character actor Ken Watanabe, who's an excellent actor, and probably more than this movie deserved in this role.
And this character's name is Mr. Tall. If you check the Wikipedia article, it's actually Hibernius Tall, which I love that name.
You know, it's just like in Harry Potter how, wow, isn't it weird that the character whose name is Remus Lupin, where the first name is the name of a character who famously suckled on a wolf, and the last name is literally Latin for wolf, ended up being a werewolf. There's a lot of that type of naming going on in Cirque du Freak, but not even that clever. Mr. Tall, for example. That's got to be an adopted name, right? It's not like Joe Tall became. It's like from the Tall family. They all happen to be tall.
Yeah, I mean, that's how you get a name like that. If your last name is Smith, probably your family was a blacksmith, so.
I suppose could be in your genes. Other freaks include a wolfman, but typically the wolfman freak is just a really hairy dude. But this wolfman is legitimately half man, half wolf. Very intense and animalistic. And one of the things he does is he bites off the arm of a woman in the audience. But the woman in the audience is part of the act. It's Jenna Maroney. And her freak ability is that she can just regrow her body and her limbs in a moment. Which, at this point, we're definitely deep into the supernatural. That is not a thing that can happen in normal humans. But I definitely dug seeing it. And Jenna Maroney, we've had her in at least one of the Christmas Carol movies. I feel like she's come up on this pod before
She was in Christmas Carol 2004, Jane Krakowski, best known as Jenna Maroney from 30 Rock.
Oh, wait, did I mix up the character name and the actress? I did, didn't I? Jane Krakowski's the actress, right?
Right.
Apologies to Jane Krakowski for that.
Come on the pod, accept our apologies.
There's a guy who is really thin in his torso, like below his ribs. He's like extremely thin, like just a few inches in diameter, which he kind of hides in garments, and then he reveals, and then you see that he's like super skinny.
And his act is that he eats like a single piece of candy corn, and you can like see it going down his tract.
Yeah. Another one that I just loved, Kristen Schaal. She's kind of like a dark horse MVP for our pod. She's been referenced a few times here, but she plays a freak who her thing is that she just has very big and strong teeth. She's like hanging from her teeth at the start of her act and stuff. And it even gets lampshaded later on that maybe that's not the most freakiest among freaky things. They're not like that outrageously large. I mean, she certainly looks more normal and human than most of the other freaks that we're describing here.
Yeah, so she expresses that she's insecure about not being freakish enough. But this is another character where the name tells you what the freak is, because she's called Gertha Teeth.
The next freak might have been my favorite, just in terms of what an idea, and just seeing it, it's exactly what's on the tin, but it's still more impressive. Is a freak named Remus Two Bellies, and he indeed has two stomachs, and that's his thing. And he like eats weird stuff and spits it out, but he can eat a whole lot because he's got two bellies. I guess he can eat at least twice as much. And I was a big fan of Remus Two Bellies, although I'll note after his act, he's rarely seen with his shirt off, so he mostly just looks like a fat man most of the time.
I liked that Remus Two Bellies seemed to be good friends with the guy who was just a spinal cord. It's like the two ends of the spectrum hanging out.
Right.
The guy who eats everything and the guy who never eats anything.
The next freak... I'm dwelling on the freaks, by the way, because they're another highlight of the movie for me. If I'm going to talk about this movie, at least let me talk about the things that I enjoyed watching here.
Yes. No judgment.
The next freak here is Evra, and he's a snake boy. Basically, instead of skin, he has snake-like scales, but otherwise he's just like a teenage boy. And his distinctive personality trait is that he is an aspiring rock star. So he starts his act and then quickly pivots to, hey, let me play you my latest song, and you can come buy a CD after the show, and jams out. I feel like he recruits someone, I forget who it is, but like some creature or something to play with him while he's up there.
Yeah, he's got like a snake crawling around behind him, but it starts eating his equipment.
Yeah. The next freak is Selma Hayek. And she comes out and she just looks absolutely ravishing, like well made up, garments that emphasize her curvaceous figure. And her thing is that she can apparently grow and ungrow a beard on her face. So she's the bearded lady, but there's more to it than that. Also, she happens to be a clairvoyant too. So like she comes out, she grows a beard, and then also she tells the fortune of Darren while she happens to be out on the stage. Very vague prophecies that she gives, like there's doom in your future type prophecies, but they kind of combined the Professor Trelawney type with the bearded lady, which is interesting.
Yeah, and the growth of the beard seems to be triggered by certain things. When she's having a vision, it'll grow. But then later on, it's revealed that she's in a relationship with John C. Reilly. And like when it gets hot and heavy, she grows the beard then too. Maybe it's tied to hormones or something.
I wrote this line down just to jump ahead. It's possibly, I'm not going to say for sure, but it's possibly the greatest piece of dialogue ever written in the history of cinema is when they kiss and John C. Reilly says, oh, they're like in the middle of a fight. And so John C. Reilly says, "Your mouth says no, but your beard says yes," because her beard started growing as they kissed. If I had written that line, I would consider my career complete as a screenwriter. Just a thing of beauty.
To quote from the Elephant Man episode, "There's nothing to do now but go home and die."
That's how I feel about that line. Like that would be the outcome there. And then indeed the last freak is John C. Reilly, whose character is named Larton Crepsley. And if we're going to be talking extremes here, superlatives, can you think of a worse character name than Larton Crepsley in any movie?
Well, to be fair, most of the characters, most of the movie call him Crepsley, which is an okay vampire name. That doesn't rub me the wrong way. But, not to get too far ahead, but in this scene, Steve recognizes Crepsley as a vampire based on a painting in one of his vampire books, which is so ridiculous. It staggers the imagination. But he points out that in the book, this vampire is called Van Horston or something. And he talks to him later on, and Steve says, "You're not Crepsley, you're Van Horston." Like, this is a big secret reveal. But then no one else in the entire movie ever says Van Horston.
No, it never comes up again.
So it doesn't matter. This is Crepsley.
I'm actually going to go one step farther and just call him John C. Reilly. That's who he is to me. He's John C. Reilly playing a vampire here. John C. Reilly has a pet spider who is called Madame Octa. And it's this tarantula-sized spider, bright red and blue, like the classic Spider-Man outfit. It made me think of Spider-Man. And she's introduced as a super venomous spider that if somebody may or may not get bit in the future would certainly kill that person. It's like a Chekhov's gun there that is, I don't even know if you can call it that given how heavy the foreshadowing is. But indeed, they have this cute little act where John C. Reilly pretends like he's trying to capture the spider or stomp the spider, but inadvertently gets into a tap dance with the spider, which I thought was pretty fun.
And he's playing a little Pied Piper flute that controls the spider.
Yeah. So, before we move on, I just want to tell you where my headspace is right now. I watched this first 30 to 35 minutes of the movie at night while I was tipsy. And, like, my thought process right here was, wait a second, is this movie actually amazing? I was just having the time of my life with the freaks and the ridiculous fake death thing at the beginning and the goddamn car with the 75 headlights. It's a purple Rolls Royce limo. I was just digging this. I was like, is this movie actually a masterpiece? Or am I just a little tipsy? But alas, I sobered up in the morning. And indeed, I think the movie from here steadily goes downhill, with a couple of highlights, but generally goes downhill from here. So there was a moment in my head where I was like, if this movie ended right now, it might actually be a 7 in my book because of how much I am enjoying this thing right here.
There's certainly elements up to this point that I really love. Like, the circus show starts off by this guy playing like a Dr. Seuss 7-ended trumpet thing that is on screen for like 5 seconds, if that. But all along through this part, I was jarred constantly by how quick we're moving from thing to thing. It's like, just wait and appreciate something for a moment. But this whole movie is like laying the groundwork of lore. And it really wants us to care about things that ultimately are not as interesting to me as the art and production elements and the glimpses of characters we get to see in like the freak show.
Yeah. I don't care about Darren Shan or his vampires or his face. I just, all that, I'm out. I want the freaks. That's what I want. I want goofy tap dancing John C. Reilly. Alas, things will pivot from here. So We see that Steve indeed does recognize John C. Reilly from that vampire book, like you mentioned, which again, just a great pull, like a historically great pull. Hey, he looks kind of vampiric, and he also looks exactly like a painting in a book I saw one time. Just really great deductive work by Steve. Shortly after John C. Reilly's act, the show is interrupted by Darren and Steve's teacher, who kind of pops up in a bunch of these scenes, as well as some prudish neighborhood folks, because we see the people who are actually at the freak show are kind of the unsavory type, leather jackets and long beards. And now these upstanding folks don't want this freak show riffraff in their neighborhood.
So this was actually very like the start of The Elephant Man.
That's true. I didn't make that connection, but it definitely is. And so everybody kind of runs off as this show is getting shut down. Darren sneaks into John C. Reilly's room, I guess his dressing room or something at the theater, and he gets a look at Madame Octa, the spider. And in a kind of moment of panic, he grabs and steals the spider, sticks it in, I guess, his shirt or his jacket or something like that. He's got the spider. He inadvertently overhears what is... We're starting to get deep into the mumbo jumbo of this movie's lore and backstory and stuff. So it's this conversation that he overhears between John C. Reilly and also just out of the blue, hadn't seen him yet, Willem Dafoe. Willem Dafoe's here, and he's a vampire, and he is like perfect as a vampire. Like if you had told me, could you see Willem Dafoe as a vampire? My answer would have been, oh yeah, of course. He's definitely a vampire.
Can you see Willem Dafoe as not a vampire?
I don't know. I can much more see him as a vampire than not a vampire.
But, I mean, they did, like, garb him up a little bit. He's got a little pencil mustache and, like, a little rouge or something.
Yeah. And he's phenomenal. And to kind of spoil, we don't see him too much. And I think this is a big mistake. He's Willem Dafoe hamming it up as a vampire on screen. And it doesn't even matter what he's talking about, because what he's talking about is this lore about this world. He's talking about vampires having a war with something called the Vampanese, who are revealed to be evil vampires. I thought at first it made me think of Japanese vampires, but they're definitely not Japanese vampires. And we later see Vampanese, and they're all basically just vampires dressed as hobos. I don't know what's going on with that.
Yeah, Teddy's description was, they're still vampires, just really dirty. And so this is one of many elements that parallels Twilight. And I don't know if it's in the Cirque du Freak books. It must be, because it's so central, but it really just feels lifted from Twilight, where you've got these two warring factions of vampires, one of whom does not kill humans, and one of whom does. So in Twilight, like the Cullen Coven, they live off of animal blood. But there's other vampire groups who kill humans. One of whom is the Volturi, which is a way cooler name than Vampanese. Volturi sounds like something that's at least original.
Right.
And like a distinct thing. It does not sound like Japanese vampires.
Another thing John C. Reilly and Willem Dafoe talk about is some character named Tiny. And we will come to recognize Tiny as the driver of that fantastic purple car. He's this large, bald man, and he just gives off every single, you called him metrosexual, just hammy villain vibes. Just amazing. He eats up every scene he can.
And in one of the scenes where he's kind of explaining his ambiguous deal, he says he's not a vampire and he's not a Vampanese, but he certainly seems to possess some kind of cosmic power.
For sure.
He says that he can, like, mold flesh, and by the end of the movie, we see him do some of what that entails.
So as Darren is listening in on this conversation, we see his friend Steve storm in on this conversation and professed to recognizing John C. Reilly's character and insisting that he be made into a vampire because, again, Steve is kind of the bad kid, but he kind of reveals that, oh, I got a crappy home life. I don't know my dad. My mom's a drunk. I hate my life. Let me be a vampire so I can be a badass. It's kind of the gist of his argument. Apparently, there's two reasons they don't do it. So both Defoe and John C. Reilly basically say, one, there's a law that we never make kids as vampires. We'll soon see that it must be a very tenuous law, malleable law, not strictly enforced. The second thing is just a very odd, I don't know why they included this, but John C. Reilly gets a taste of his blood and says, your blood tastes evil, I think is the phrasing he uses. Like, what would you think if somebody told you that your blood tasted evil? I don't know. That was just a very bizarre moment that I guess is supposed to like be foreshadowing that he's going to be a villain at some point, but to me came off as mean-spirited, but like poorly executed mean spirit here. I don't know.
Everything is so abrupt. It comes to a head in this scene. Just apropos of nothing, Steve strides in. I recognized you from a painting in my vampire book. Make me a vampire. Then, immediately, no, you have evil blood. Go away. It's like, this is a lot for the audience to process, I feel, and I think it needs to be given a little more time than it gets.
Right, for sure. The next scene, we see Darren heading home, and he meets Tiny. So now we know who Tiny is. And then, apparently, I couldn't keep track of who some of the characters were. I think he looked like a hobo, so I think he was one of the Vampanese who was in this car, this limousine, that gives Darren a ride home.
So this guy is Murlaw, who is a prominent Vampanese. I don't know if he's the head Vampanese, but he's going to be important later on. At this point, I want to read the Wikipedia synopsis up to this point. I know we've already laid out the details, but I think this gives it to us at about the speed we get it in the movie. So, it says, in an unnamed American town, teenagers Darren Shan and Steve Leonard, Darren's more rebellious best friend and classmate, sneak out at night to attend the Cirque du Freak freak show at a local theater. During the performance, Steve recognizes one of the troupe's members, Lawton Crepsley, as a vampire who is over 100 years old, prompting him to try to find Crepsley after the show. Meanwhile, Darren is fascinated by Crepsley's spider, Madame Octa. He goes backstage and impulsively steals her, but is forced to hide as Crepsley returns to his green room. Steve arrives, begging to be made into a vampire, but Crepsley refuses after tasting Steve's blood, which he says tastes of evil. When Crepsley realizes that Madame Octa has been stolen, Darren flees from the theater with Crepsley hot on his trail. He escapes when the mysterious Mr. Tiny arrives in his limousine, accompanied by Murlaw. And that's about as quickly as it happens. If you cut out the performance by the freaks, I think like that is the runtime of that summary.
Yeah. It's a whole lot of what the fuck is going on in this film, for sure. So the next day in school, remember Darren stole this red and blue mystical spider, and Steve and Darren have a little tussle that results in Madame Octa being released. After a little chase scene, Madame Octa bites Steve, which again, we had been warned that a bite from this spider is deadly. So now Darren's best friend, Steve, like we cut right away to another scene, but we learn that basically he goes into a coma after getting bit and is probably not long for the world. What Darren decides to do is he goes back to the theater where he saw the freak show. And I guess his thought is that he would maybe bump into John C. Reilly there, which he indeed does. And he basically begs for an antidote to save Steve. He's feeling guilty about stealing the spider, guilty about the spider getting out and biting Steve, and he wants to save his friend's life. And so like 3 scenes from insisting kids never become vampires. John C. Reilly offers the bargain. All right, I will give him the antidote if and only if you agree to become my half vampire eternal assistant. So I guess Darren is going to become a vampire, despite the fact that Steve couldn't.
And this half vampire thing bothers me a lot because he says he's going to make him a half vampire specifically so Darren can be out in the day running errands for him. Which, okay, I get that. I can see why that would be useful. But beyond that, there's no explanation of what a half vampire is and what's different in the creation process between half and full.
That's definitely true. That is not well articulated. But the way that he makes him a half vampire is they do a hand-to-hand blood transfusion. They prick blood, all 5 fingers on, I guess, both hands, and like push their hands together. Like we see the blood surge to Darren as he becomes this quasi semi vampire.
Yeah, so the vampires in this world do a ton of stuff with their fingernails. They have like hypodermic fingernails that they're always stabbing and slashing with. And that at least is very creepy. It makes my skin crawl. Fingernails are gross.
Yeah, you don't like fingernails or teeth. That's one thing I know about you. Over the course of the rest of the movie, we're going to learn about what the vampire powers are. It seems to be a pretty random assortment of powers. So they have really sharp fingernails. That is one. They can do something that's called flitting, Flitting, which is basically like a super speed run, like the Flash, that is somewhat equivalent to teleporting.
And that's something that they can do in Twilight too. Like, Edward early on runs around with Bella on his back. And that's something that, sure enough, John C. Reilly is doing for Darren in short order.
Another thing vampires can do is they have healing spit, which I don't know why they do, but I guess that's a useful thing to have.
Yeah, so we're going to see a lot of vampires scratching each other and then licking themselves like cats. And all of it just makes me very uneasy.
And then the last thing we learn about that literally serves no purpose in the plot is we are told that vampires' breath puts people to sleep. And I think the point here is that this is a way you can extract blood from people without killing them. You breathe on them real hard, they'll fall asleep. You can poke them with your creepy ass fingernails, drink some of the blood, and then go away. And then they'll just wake up and say, why did I fall asleep? Why do I have a scratch on my shoulder? I don't know, but at least I'm alive. And that's the extent that we get to see the sleep breath. So after Darren becomes a vampire, they do indeed save Steve's life. And then we kind of get life as normal for, I guess, a couple days, but we get a becoming vampire montage for Darren. It includes, this movie has some just historically bad needle drops, and the worst one is this montage. There's this just horrible song where they say the line, "Something is not going right," over and over again. And we see him use his powers and like learn what he is as a vampire. He's got strong fingernails. He's going to eat bloody steak. And he also says goodnight to his sister. And when he says goodnight to his sister, he like gets this weird tunnel vision with the clear intent to bite his sister's neck.
So one thing in the lead up to biting the sister that I actually thought was good, it goes on my good things list, is when Darren is going up the stairs to say goodnight to the sister, he's like staggering up the stairs, and it's lit in such a way that it casts a shadow on the wall through the banister that is obviously an homage to Nosferatu.
Oh man.
It's like somebody clearly said, we need to do the Nosferatu staircase shot.
I haven't seen Nosferatu. I did not connect that, but that That is actually pretty cool. After this montage, which really only lasts like, there's 3 flashes in this montage. I feel like most montages, you need at least 4 or 5 like mini scenes within the montage, but this one only has about 3. But anyways, Darren reconnects with John C. Reilly, who appears in his room at one point, and basically John C. Reilly says, all right, we're going to stage your death so you can come and be my assistant like we talked about, and you're a vampire or a half vampire or something. And this will basically give Darren's family a state of closure, which brings us to the opening scene. But the way that he fakes the death is by breaking the neck of Darren and like distracting him, and then abruptly breaking his neck and throwing him off the roof of the house.
It's very funny, very startling.
And like ooky, like it makes your skin crawl a little bit when you see the broken neck Darren just like sprawled out on the roof for a couple minutes, or not a couple minutes, but briefly for sure. So now Darren, we're back at that scene we saw at the beginning, and we see the funeral, and then we see John C. Reilly resuscitating Darren, and a scene that I don't even know what's happening here. Like something or someone attacks John C. Reilly in the midst of this. I think it's a Vampanese. I don't know. It's never properly explained.
Yeah, we get a fight here between a Vampanese and John C. Reilly. It's like Darren is up. So he raises Darren back, but then immediately has to toss him back down in the grave again because this Vampanese attacks. And this was another one of my favorite moments, just because John C. Reilly and this attacking Vampanese both do their goofy flit power, where they like get a lagging Windows effect behind them, where they're like dragging this glitchy tail, and they're punching each other around and just dragging each other around at super speed, and they start bouncing off the tombstones in the graveyard, and the tombstones are ringing like pinball targets, like bing bing bing, as they're just ricocheting off the tombstones. And I enjoyed this quite a bit, just how silly it was as they're playing graveyard pinball.
After this fight, John C. Reilly brings Darren to the Cirque du Freak camp. So I guess all the freaks live in a camp together. I don't know. But I like this segment. I like basically anything at the camp because we get more of the freaks, and they're easily the most fun set of characters in this movie. We meet all the freaks that we had previously seen, and plus a couple others. That like there's a guy with a really long forehead. And we also meet a girl who works at the camp named Rebecca. And she seems like a perfectly normal girl. She's obviously poised to be the love interest. And Darren is wondering why you at a freak camp. And we'll ultimately learn that she's a monkey girl, which just means she has a monkey tail. That's the extent to which she's a monkey girl.
Which is how she should describe herself. She should just lead that she has a tail and show the tail. But
yeah.
She says, oh, I'm a monkey girl. And Darren doesn't ask what that is. But clearly he's confused. And
yeah.
As are we all.
And by the way, although she is in the script as the love interest, the actual love interest is undoubtedly Steve. We've already hinted at there is some gay undertones in this film.
Yeah, this whole movie is a seething cauldron of homoeroticism.
Speaking of freak-related romances, I think you mentioned this. We learned that the beard lady is John C. Reilly's girlfriend, and this is where we get that line, your mouth says no, but your beard says yes, which I've already said my piece on.
Another thing we find is that the prognosticator, Salma Hayek, when she has a vision, she immediately forgets what she said. And so she has to rely on other people to tell her what her prophecies were. And they don't always tell her the truth.
Also, not to get too shallow, but John C. Reilly is a goofy-looking MF, and Salma Hayek is a beautiful actress and certainly presented as very beautiful in this film. So there's a little bit of kudos John C. Reilly for landing this lady.
Yeah, it's like somebody's doing him a favor here. It reminds me a little of like in From Dusk Till Dawn, where she is in that movie, and it's pretty much just so Quentin Tarantino can suck her toes. But in that case, it was clear that he was the one pulling the strings, and I think John C. Reilly is just getting third-party perks here.
Another thing at the camp is these little creatures. They're like knee-high, maybe 1.5 feet tall. I thought they looked a lot like Gollum from The Lord of the Rings. The guys on Buzzed On Movies have different ways of describing them, but they're these little shitty creatures who kind of play the role of a cute animal sidekick. I found them really unpleasant, and like there's some gags around them, like, oh, is he gonna bite you? Oh, he actually bit you. What a naughty little creature.
Yeah, they're like little goblins. They're like Yodas without big ears.
Yeah.
I don't know. I could take or leave them. I thought they were kind of funny, but also they were out of place.
So after we kind of meet this camp, the story picks up with another montage. This one is life at Freak Camp, and I would have watched a whole movie of, maybe even a TV show of life at Freak Camp. Hear all the weird freaks doing their things day to day, and how they interact and mess around with each other, and the chores they have to do. And he gets to know Jess, or what is her name, Rebecca, whatever the monkey girl's name is. I think it's Rebecca. And this was another relative highlight, although it didn't go on nearly as long as I wanted. To me, this is the promise of the premise of the movie. He's the vampire's assistant. He's got to do assistant-y things, which include dirty work at the Freak Camp. Give me more of that. I thought that was an underused element of the movie.
I would pay to spend a night glamping at the Freak Camp. And yeah, I liked some of the things we get to see here. We start to understand the jobs that he does for John C. Reilly, which one thing is that he guards the coffin while John C. Reilly sleeps during the day. And I liked this coffin. We're going to learn more about this coffin as the movie goes.
Right. Why don't you just say what it is now? It's like, it's not actually a coffin, but it's like a door to like an underground layer or something, right?
Okay, so this is Gauntlet's coffin. I never thought in a movie I would see a coffin that works the way Gauntlet's coffin works, which is that it's like a door on top of the ground that has a staircase inside it that goes down into a larger crypt that also contains additional coffins. It's like, I've always kind of thought that setup was pretty strange, even though I thought it up. And, you know, there are parts that I've thought, this beggars belief. This is just an unrealistic premise that's going to be hard for people to follow. But here it is in a major Hollywood release.
Yeah, for sure.
John C. Reilly in Count Gauntlet's coffin.
Great minds think alike or something like that. I don't know if you'd want to be associated with the great minds.
Mediocre minds, perhaps.
So I mentioned earlier that the movie took a downward tilt after the Freak Show. And I think this is around the point when it takes another downward tilt, just in terms of coherency and how much anybody cares about anything that's going on. So I'm going to hit through the rest of this plot in pretty quick bullet points. One is that Steve, the best friend, is still back at the high school. He's going through a dark phase, but he somehow convinced himself that Darren isn't dead, but is in fact a vampire, and is like acting up at school as a result. And it seems like he's considering suicide, jumping off of the school, when he gets recruited by Tiny. We don't know anything about what Tiny's motivations are at this point. And even after the movie, I don't know what Tiny's motivations are. Something about starting a war that he can cash in on, but I don't really know. So now Steve is in the picture, and he gets some sort of power at some point. Does he get made into a vampire, or just is he some other supernatural thing?
Yeah, he gets, like, blooded into the Vampanese gang.
Okay.
They turn him. Which means that he gets, like, greased up, spiked hair. And red contact lenses.
Yeah, I loved his contact lenses and his, like, increasingly glam goth look as he leaned more into his vampire life. Like, he definitely would have been a better vampire than Darren. John C. Reilly made a mistake here.
I think on Buzzed On Movies they call his new persona Arch.
Yeah, that fits for sure. There's a scene with Darren flirting with Rebecca, the monkey girl, and it might be the worst written flirting scene that I've watched in any teen movie. Like, it happens over a pair of pants. So she's like, oh, you gotta get, she, I guess, runs the costuming or whatever. Gotta get some new pants. And then they kept, oh, your pants look nice. Well, thanks for the pants. And I was like, stop talking about the goddamn pants, okay? This is terrible. And the reveal that she's a monkey girl happens in this scene. And it's hilariously bad. It's like, she says, oh, but I'm a monkey girl. And he says, oh, you're joking, right? And she says, no. And that is literally what it is. It doesn't go any further than that. And I'll talk a little bit more about some changes I would make to this movie. The Rebecca character, they couldn't quite figure out what to do with. But this actress, I don't even know her name. Let me see if I can look it up. Her name is Jessica Carlson. And I was sure that I had seen her before, but she's been in basically nothing else. So I think what it is that she looks like other actresses I've seen. And I spent a little bit of time thinking about it. And I came up with the perfect blend. You combine these three actresses, it's going to look exactly like this actress, Jessica Carlson. She's 1/3 Shailene Woodley, 1/3 Mae Whitman, and 1/3 Zosha Mamet. Look up those actresses and imagine someone who is like in the center point between those three. And it's exactly what this actress looks like.
Yeah, I think that tracks.
We get some fight training with John C. Reilly, but then it introduces this element where Darren isn't strong because he needs blood, which I guess, like, there's supposed to be this big ethical dilemma about, do you drink blood? Do you kill humans? Do you harm humans? And I never bought into any of it.
Yeah, Darren wants to stay as human as possible, so he's not eating his spinach. He's not drinking blood, and he's becoming anemic and doesn't have all the powers he's supposed to have.
Right, his fingernails aren't working properly because he hasn't been drinking his blood. If I had a nickel for every time I've been there, I can relate to him on that one. The Vampanese at some point invade the freak camp, and they abduct Rebecca, and like nobody seems to notice or care except Darren. He's like, "What? I guess I'll go rescue Rebecca, the monkey girl."
Well, I didn't care by this point, so I don't blame them.
Meanwhile, they also, in a separate scene, they being Tiny and Steve, they also abduct Darren's family, who I had completely forgotten about and did not care about either. And all this leads to the climax of the film, which is this confrontation at the theater where we initially saw the freak show. And we see, like, very inhumanly the family dangling and Rebecca the monkey girl all like dangling in these ropes. And this to me was actually, I think, unintentionally comedic because we keep seeing them in the background just limply hanging there as all this action is going on.
It's like a weird puppet show.
Yeah. And one thing that made me laugh out loud here at this climax, I think it's one of the Vampanese is introducing, they build up, they're going to introduce someone, the future leader of us all, and they call him the one known as Steve, which is like the least dramatic name possible. It made me think of Monty Python and the Holy Grail, whereas there are some who call me Tim or something like that.
Right.
And then we get this climax is just this one big incoherent fight scene. Everybody's fighting each other. There's a couple of cool moves and moments, but it just, I didn't even know who was on whose side, really. And at one point, Rebecca frees herself using her tail. It's our first glimpse of her tail, which, by the way, for that being her signature thing, we don't see it that much. We only see it in like 2 scenes, her tail. And she offers Darren some of her blood to re-strength himself. So now he's back in the fight. John C. Reilly kills a Vampanese. And then at the end of this climax, I guess we learned that Tiny has kind of been pulling the strings all along, which I don't know if that was supposed to be a big revelation or not. Like, it kind of seemed like he was the whole time. So I didn't really know what to make of that revelation.
But it's kind of a moment of begun this Clone War has.
Right.
Where now the movie is over, but the story is just beginning.
Yeah.
So I'm sure we'll get a 7-season TV show that explains what happens between this one and the second movie we'll get.
Maybe there's a Cirque du Freak diverse out there somewhere. It's some alternate universe. And so the movie ends... Oh, I guess we learned that Tiny is able to absorb the powers of vampires, which is how the golem-y creatures are made. I think that was the implication. It wasn't really focused on.
Yeah, like when the Vampanese dude dies, he can drain him, and we get this little, like, leftover Voldemort baby husk.
And Darren's family gets their memory wiped, so they don't know there's vampires. And we finally get a kiss between Darren and Rebecca, which is just one of the least electric kisses in a teen movie that I've ever seen.
Although there is a great line, because... as is par for the course in this movie, people just walk up and say abruptly what they're thinking. And so Darren steps up to the girl and he says, "Can I kiss you now?" And she says, "Darren, you drank my blood. Of course you can kiss me." Which is a great line. And one I happen to agree with. In fact, I would say the reverse is, don't kiss me unless you drank my blood.
That's step one in the relationship.
That's right. That's first base. We get out the syringes.
And the last scene of the movie is Darren is officially inducted into the Freaks, even though he's not really a freak. And I didn't know he wasn't inducted at this point. So I don't know what was going on here. But huzzah, Darren is a freak. And we get lots of sequel bait. And that's the end of Cirque du Freak 2009. And I can't believe we're this far in the podcast and we actually talked about the story that much, because it's kind of an incoherent mess.
Yeah.
So, Brian, we talked through the story of this movie. We talked about some things we liked, some things we didn't. But what are some other good things about this movie?
There were some things that I liked. I was a fan, largely speaking, of the adult cast. John C. Reilly knocks it out of the park in some ways. He's good like he almost always is. He brought more to bear than perhaps the material deserved. Then there are the adult characters who we just get glimpses of and you want more. I think you're going to talk about some of these guys. But a big one for me is Willem Dafoe. I'm sure they were holding him back for part 2, and it's a shame. I would prefer that this was Cirque du Foe instead of Cirque du Freak. But what we get is pretty good. I like a lot of the freaks too, as you've mentioned. They all have unique looks that are pretty startling. I would want to see these people in a sideshow. And yeah, they are just interesting to see. Hibernius Tull's head is very disturbing and eye-catching. It's just got weird dimensions. We've had a couple movies in a row now with big weird heads.
That's right.
And then there's the guy who doesn't do much, who in the subtitles was labeled Loaf Head, who his whole thing is he just has a really, really tall forehead, like 5 feet of forehead. And it looked like they created this effect by just like photoshopping using the smear tool and just like spreading his head to the top of every frame like Doug Dimmadome's hat on Fairly Odd Parents. So, and then Jane Krakowski is here, Kristen Schaal, and they're all memorable, even though we only see them for like 30 seconds, some of them.
Yeah, I totally agree. I love the freaks in general. They filled it out with really interesting actors, most of them quite good actors, or at least very distinctive actors, and just really interesting designs for them. And, you know, maybe the idea is that we would see more of them in a sequel. I loved whenever they were on screen, and you're 100% right. We should have seen more of them. Major missed opportunity to, what is it like when the skinny guy eats this other thing? And I don't know, just more stuff like that, because they were fun.
every other good thing I wrote down, we've already shouted out. I mean, I love the credits animation, Mr. Tiny's car, and I also enjoyed, as I said, the Nosferatu tribute shot, which I gotta pull up. I don't see it acknowledged by anybody on Google, but I swear it was there.
Yeah, you can bring some intelligence to the Cirque du Freak discourse that I'm sure is very active online for this 2009 flop.
Well, it's related to vampires, so I'm sure there's a fandom out there somewhere.
That's probably true. I want to circle back to John C. Reilly and some of the things he does really well. Whenever he is a deadpan mentor, which is a significant portion of the movie, he's absolutely amazing. He's very funny, but he like projects this character that's like just tired of life and like idiots, dealing with idiots. And of course, Darren is an idiot. There's no question about that. And it's just whenever he's doing that stuff, he's absolutely amazing.
He does have a good line, which I haven't heard from a vampire before, that he says, "Life sucks, and there's a lot of it." Something along those lines. Or life is meaningless, and there's a lot of it.
Right. Something like that. Yeah, I remember that. He was less convincing to me when he was in the action hero role, when he was doing lots of punching and slashing and stuff. Because he would like make tough faces, but it would be like, oh, that's just John C. Reilly. And it was like not intimidating or intense at all. But most of the time I thought he was pretty excellent, and I was glad he was here. I think he was a good casting choice.
Yeah, not too often that he gets to be a leading man. It happens. I mean, you got Wreck-It Ralph, you got Walk Hard.
Right. Yeah, I mean, just the laundry list of charming characters and performances. I really liked Tiny. This is like the purple, bald pimp guy who drives the car. Whenever he was on, he was just savoring it and making it count. And I think he should have like ditched the Vampanese. I'm going to give you my proposed rewrites to this film in a minute. We need more Tiny. We need more Willem Dafoe. That's my pitch, my central pitch to this movie. More Tiny, more Willem Dafoe.
Oh, I agree. So, if you've never seen What We Do in the Shadows, it's this mockumentary from New Zealand. It's brought to us by some of the Flight of the Conchords creative team. And this whole movie, I mean, What We Do in the Shadows came later than this film, but the whole time I was watching this one, I just wished that it was an American version of What We Do in the Shadows starring John C. Reilly and Willem Dafoe. Like, that's my alternate pitch. It's like, cut out the teens. Just give us goofy, funny vampires, where some of them are, like, more grim and serious than others.
I can see that for sure, because it's the best parts of this movie. And the last thing, I know we've been ripping on the movie a lot, and most of it's well-deserved. I, unlike you, did not have a preformed opinion, or I hadn't really read any analysis or heard any reviews or anything of this movie. I came in with an open mind. I found the first 45 minutes or so to be alternating between kind of slow and dull, but on the other side, pretty fun and campy when it was leaning into its horror aesthetics. And I do think that the first half, I watched this movie twice. The first half has some energy to it that the second half does not have whatsoever. And when it was being campy fun, I was actually digging it. But I am ready. Oh, last thing I just want to re-shout out. Josh Hutcherson. He impressed me. And I would watch a Steve spinoff. Steve doing things. And people introducing him as the one known as Steve. I liked him, so.
Yeah, you can tell why he's the one who went on to have a career.
Yeah. Like, honestly, how much better is this movie if they just swapped the casting between Darren and Steve?
Probably considerably.
I think it's significantly better, yeah. Because, honestly, Hutcherson's overall vibe is much more of, like, a kind of good, boring guy, wholesome type that comes a little bit closer to the edge. Like, I feel like he could have pulled that off at the lead role much better, but he would go on to the Hunger Games, so he at least got his chance to shine there. I'm ready to talk about some not so good things about Cirque du Freak.
Oh yeah, me too.
I'm going to start with something small. The poster is so bad. Have you ever looked up the poster for this movie?
I saw some image that was just John C. Reilly and Darren standing next to a tombstone. Is that generally the idea?
That is the idea. I'm going to copy it and send it to you. And it's dire. It's like a heavily photoshopped.
Oh, John C. Reilly's got like crazy red hair.
Yeah, like Carrot Top. How do I get the picture? Well, anyways, look up the poster on Letterboxd and you'll see just one of the uglier posters you've seen for a major commercial release. And I think that sets the tone for this film, that it's not peak competence of filmmaking.
What it reminds me a lot of, this poster, is... Do you remember the Sorcerer's Apprentice film from 2010 starring Nicolas Cage?
Oh, I never saw it. Isn't it Jay Baruchel? Or I don't know how you say his name.
Oh, as the kid?
Yeah.
I think probably. That's one I actually saw in theaters, and I immediately knew I would forget it. I guess I haven't forgotten it completely, because I remember that it happened. And I remember that the poster had a very similar vibe. And I guess the Sorcerer's Apprentice being similar to the Vampire's Assistant is not particularly surprising.
That's a good point. They're basically different versions of the same thing.
And they're a year apart, so.
There you go. Probably could throw that on the laundry list of failed franchises.
Definitely. Man, speaking just for a moment of bad names for things, in The Sorcerer's Apprentice, the team of wizards are called Merlinians. I think that's even less wieldy than Vampanese.
Merlinians, yeah, that's pretty rough. A couple of other things. We already talked about the Darren Shan actor. He was doing nothing for me. Just visually, this movie is not good. The action scenes are really dull. Like, I wanted them to be more fun than they were. There's a couple of like interesting ideas, but it's just never fun. In particular, the cinematography is just atrocious. It made me actively mad. Like, okay, hey, I got this movie. It's about a circus and vampires, and it's going to be shot in the dark and in the shadows. Hey, does anybody want to come make a cool neo-noir? And so they pull this guy whose biggest credit was making a movie where everybody learns that racism is bad in Crash. And it's just like this talky drama. And he shoots everything in the dullest, flat darkness. You can't see anything. I actually forgot that the cool car we've been talking about is purple, because it's shot so dark and desaturated that you don't see the color whenever it's in the night scenes. You only see it in the daytime, and you just can't ever tell what's going on in the darkness, and it never looks good when you can see it. So
yeah, a vampire circus needs more blacklight paintings. Needs more vivid fluorescent colors.
It's shadows and weird proportions and like lights and askew angles and stuff. Man, they missed the boat on this, and I'm mad about it. Before I get into my proposed high-level rewrite, any other bad things we haven't had a chance to talk about that you'd like to bring up?
So I feel like it suffers from some of the same things that earned Now You See Me a low rating from me, which is like, it has so many things that I would like at the surface and then didn't pull through for me. I mean, if you just started with the sentence, okay, it's a vampire movie set at a circus freak show. Like, I'm in. I'm going to watch this movie. But then your mileage may vary once you get in the door of the tent.
I agree with that. Some surface level interesting stuff that just falls apart the second you look more closely at it. So here's how I would rewrite this film if I were handed this script. And I personally didn't have any attachment to the novels, and so was just writing the best movie that I could without any loyalty to the source material, here's what I would do. In general, I think you should make it more Harry Potter-like, where you're not getting into the big bads and the political conspiracies and stuff. Make it more about the kid. Make it more about his journey. And I would just immediately off the bat cut out the Vampanese characters. They're adding almost nothing to this film. They're like the villains, but we already have a great villain in Tiny, or at least a charming villain in Tiny. And rather than having Tiny's motivation be like ambiguous and nuanced, he like wants there to be a war between two tribes. And so he's sowing discord by favoring one side instead of the other, which is causing violence, which will ultimately lead to war. I don't want any of that bullshit. Get that out of here. Tiny just wants to destroy vampires. Make him a vampire destroyer. He's a good villain already. Just add that as his thing. And maybe he wants, the reason he wants to destroy them is because he wants to absorb all their power and rule the world or something like that. Make that his motivation. This is a better movie. And you also, in general, there's too much fighting in this movie, punching and scraping, especially for John C. Reilly. I feel like he's got 7 scenes where we just have to wait 90 seconds for him to punch a few things and then escape. Cut down on those a lot. And instead give us more of the freak shenanigans. More time at the freak camp and a longer freak show and more character interactions and make us feel that community a little bit more. Lastly, I think Willem Dafoe needs to appear not for one scene, but for every scene. And I like the idea that he's always there talking with John. Maybe he's like a mentor to John C. Reilly or something. But we get a final twist that he's actually conspiring with the villain, because he makes a good villain too. And I'd love to see him conspiring with Tiny. And maybe he dies at the end of the movie or something. I don't know. You could come up with some way to do that. But give us more Dafoe, as we've said so far. And I also want to just ratchet up the suggested homoeroticism between Steve and Darren. Like, make Steve pretty openly attracted towards Darren and like having that be the basis of his kind of meltdown. Like, amp that up even more. I think there's room for that. And speaking of like attractions between characters, Rebecca, she's doing nothing for me here. She's kind of got a girl next door vibe. That doesn't fit. Here's where I'm going to give my vampire rant. Vampires need to be sexual. Need to be a metaphor for sex and for sleaziness and for giving in to your base desires. Unless you're doing like a really cartoony or parody version of it. Because think about the images of a vampire. A vampire, it's teeth biting into the flesh and women letting out blood. It's like all sexual images, and that's just how it's got to work. I mean, that's kind of why Twilight works to the extent that it achieved a mass audience, is it like tapped that metaphor, but for a teenage girl audience instead of like classic gothic horror.
Yeah, it's sexy coming of age.
Exactly. Making her be this kind of generic nice girl doesn't work. Make her sassy. Make her someone that Darren is constantly tempted to bite, constantly seeing her vein and wanting to just inject his fangs into. That makes this character a lot more interesting. And then have the moment where she lets him suck his blood actually be a bite, and it would have like a sexual charge to it. I feel like that could have been a really powerful moment if they had totally reworked it.
Yeah, I feel like it doesn't even show him taking the blood. She's just like, here, have some blood. And then it cuts over to like the goofy John C. Reilly fight. I don't remember seeing any blood change hands.
Right. And then in this climax, cut out, again, where the Vampanese are already gone, cut out all this lore about the warring tribes. Let's build to that in the sequels. Let's make this a standalone fun movie on its own and just have it be Darren and Steve duking it out, and then Tiny's there for some reason. And of course, Willem Dafoe, because he's got to be in every scene in my rewrite. And there's my movie. It bumps up 2 points on the Is It Good scale if you do the rewrites, guaranteed.
Yeah, it sounds like at least.
So You know, I like to come at movies with the analytical angle and suggesting changes. That's what I came up with. Any additional thoughts before we get to is it good?
I also would want to see more circus posters. I want to see a fancy poster done up for each of these freaks.
Okay, yeah, yeah. Like maybe on their tent or something at the camp.
Yeah. I think that was... So this was a circus movie. Good pick there. It mixes it up a little bit by throwing in the vampires. But I want a couple more circus tropes. The posters is the big one. Maybe some more calliope music.
You gotta have, are they called Dutch angles when you see stuff like kind of diagonal, weird, tilted angles?
Oh yeah, we could have had like a house of mirrors here, which vampires don't have reflections. That never came up. Have a vampire go into a house of mirrors. Like, there's all these ideas that are coming to mind just now.
Yeah, and get rid of the stupid powers. I don't want my vampire to have sleep breath. That's not a fun power. That's gone. That in my script, vampires don't have that power.
I'm getting ready to rate. I'm close.
You're chomping at the bit, chomping at the vein.
That's right. I feel a thirst.
All right, so Brian, I will ask you: is Cirque du Freak 2009, The Vampire's Assistant, episode 45 of The Goods? Is that movie good?
Oh man, this is a rating I've been waiting to give. I've never given it before. I thought it might come off as fake, and I would have to track down a movie specifically to get this rating, which I might still do because I think I've found a good one. But this movie gets a 2 out of 8. A not good. Never before given by either of us.
A historic moment. This movie is not good. 2 out of 8.
And what elevates it above being a 1 is that it is competently made in some regards. This is not Robert 2015. This is not just garbage that was made for no money and you can watch it on Amazon Prime for like 99 cents or whatever. It is elevated by having some elements that I do enjoy. It's got some pretty big names in here who I'm sure we're expecting to potentially show up in sequels. And I think a lot of them at least turn in good performances. I mean, we've said the things that we like, but it is really held back for me by just the lightning pace of things happening that I didn't feel invested in. And, like, this movie is 2 hours long, and I was feeling it. Because there is a lot of story. I mean, we spent a long time recapping, but I just felt pulled out of it. I never cared about these people. Think about the opening of Harry Potter, where it just does a really good job of gradually introducing the world. You get why Harry doesn't want to stay with the Dursleys. You get the introduction of magic via Hagrid, who is instantly compelling because he's really big, and then it just builds where he opens the wall and suddenly you're in this whole magic village and everybody seems to have a story and a world going on around them that you care about. And I just didn't get any of that here. But how did you, I've pretty much said my piece. How did you feel about this movie, Dan?
My relationship with this movie is that the more that I have looked at it and thought about it, I watched it twice, the less I've liked it. I mentioned I watched the first half hour or so in an inebriated state, and that heightened my appreciation for it. And the more that I watched it after I sobered up and came back and looked at it again, it doesn't hold together. I wanted to be fond of it because there are lots of things on the surface level that I want to root for. And maybe I kind of like, but just none of it actually pulls through. Very little of it. I'm going to give it a not good. So I think I was a little more fond of it overall than you were. There were moments where I was charmed. There were scenes where I was charmed. It was a world I wanted to spend more time in. I felt like it wasn't fully realized, but I wanted to spend more time in it. And I wanted to like it. I couldn't. And so 3 out of 8 on our is a good scale, a not good, not quite good-ish. I'd say it's on the upper half of a 3 for me, but that's kind of where I landed on it. Just a missed opportunity to combine 3 things that I like, or that would make a delicious cinema stew: vampires, circuses, and teen drama. Just throw all those together, and it was a right out there. Just take your swing and you got it, and they kind of botched it. So, oh well. I guess I'm actually tempted to read the books. I am going to the beach next week, and I got the first book to give it a try and see if I dig the Darren Shan saga in text form any more than I do in cinema form.
Oh man, well, then I don't know if I want to say this next part, because before we announce the movies for next week's discussion, I wanted to just give the ending of the Darren Shan saga.
Oh man.
Maybe you guys can read the 12 books that were cranked out in 4 years, and you can find out for yourselves.
So I appreciate you not spoiling the book for me.
No, I realize you'll have to listen back before you post, so I couldn't just have you plug your ears. But Mr. Tiny is very important, and I will say that the character's full name is Desmond Tiny, and he says that his friends call him Des, so he is Des Tiny, or Destiny,
right,
as his vanity plate says.
Gotcha. But as we say farewell to our freaks at the Cirque du Freak Vampires Assistant Freak Camp and move on from perhaps a black mark on Circus Month, what do you have for us? Are we exiting Circus Month now that we've watched 4 movies, or do you have one more for us?
No, we got 5 movies in Time Loop Month, and February is actually a pretty short month. It only has 4 weeks. July this year, we've actually got 5 recording days. And so we have a caboose here on our circus train. This is a film that I had on a short list for goods discussion early on, and I wouldn't have thought to include it here, but I just recently rewatched like the first 5 minutes of the movie and realized it is a perfect circus selection. So early on, I thought my last pick of the month was going to be Big Top Pee-wee, the second Pee-wee Herman theatrical outing. That is not the case, though. I found something I think is maybe even a little better. And this is The Care Bears movie from 1985. Is this a surprise?
I didn't have the Care Bears movie on my short list.
And I think you'll see why it's a circus movie when we watch. I know, hearing the title now, it probably doesn't jump out to you. When you see this title pop up on your podcast feed next week, it might not jump out to you. But listen in, because it is very circusy.
I will keep an open mind. Okay.
All right. Well, I'm looking forward to it. Thank you for joining us on this thorough discussion of Cirque du Freak, the Vampire's Assistant from 2009.
All right. Thanks, Brian. And thanks, listeners.